They meet on a quarterly basis 4 times a year. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what our office does, just very quickly, some of the things our office does. We provide direct services to clients who are deaf or have hearing loss. We work with businesses and agencies to help them understand compliance with the ADA. We facilitate training regarding deaf culture and other issues. We operate the Junior Commissioner Program when we're able to do so, and that's an opportunity for youth to connect with other youth who are deaf or have hearing loss and to be at home with their peers. We have a website that has vlogs and as an access to resources and information for people who are deaf. And we house a large library so people can come in and check out materials, and it's one of the larger libraries in Iowa. October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, and the theme is a strong workforce is an inclusive workforce. What will you do? What can you do, pardon me? I believe it's important more than ever now that we provide services for the deaf, because funding streams are becoming more and more scarce. I believe we need to continue to collaborate with hearing groups because we need our allies in the schools, in our communities, and in our workplaces. And I believe we need to continue to teach our youth and even some adults to self-advocate so they can live their lives to the fullest and have their rights and freedoms protected. And I will close with this poem called Silent Hands by Sandra L. Brooks. Can you hear me? Listen not with your ears, but with your eyes. To you they speak, my silent hands. Hear me tell my tale. Hear me sing my song. Learn my language, my beautiful native language. Hear my hands. Hear my music and story. Learn my language. Speak to me with your hands. Share my beautiful language. Hear my silent hands. We have a tale to tell, a song to sing. Open your eyes and hear me speak. I am sure you will enjoy the remarks of Dr. Hurwitz, and I look forward to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. That's wonderful. It's unfortunate that Stephanie Lyon is unable to be with us today, but perhaps next time we will have her. The next speaker we have is a woman that works for Relay Iowa, and I think it's quite appropriate that today, unlike in years gone by, a blind person like me can make a telephone call to a deaf person like Dr. Hurwitz through a Relay Iowa service. And would you please give a warm welcome for Lois Spohr of Relay Iowa.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dr. Hurwitz. I want to thank you for this opportunity to speak for just a short bit today. As I'm looking around and seeing a lot of familiar faces, I know a lot of you are familiar already with what our services are here in Iowa through Relay Iowa, but I would like to just give you a little brief overview, just as a reminder. The Relay Iowa is overseen by our Iowa Utilities Board. They manage the relay to make sure that people who are deaf, blind, hard of hearing, or people who have difficulty speaking can communicate on the telephone. And they do that through the relay program as well as through Iowa's equipment program, which is another program that the Iowa Utilities Board manages. So we have Telecommunications Access Iowa as well as Relay Iowa here in the state. So I think we're real fortunate. The relay services that are provided through our state program vary, and I think a lot of you know and are familiar with the traditional services, such as the TTY. And I certainly realize that a lot of you use many other services that are available out there. But I would like to talk also and just kind of let everybody know of some services that are forgotten a little more often here in Iowa. Like I said, we have the TTY service for people who are deaf, but we also have what's called hearing carryover service. People can utilize a TTY or a specialized device which allows them to type and our relay operator will speak for them. People who would use hearing carryover or HCO would be people who cannot speak. So they're using our same service to allow them to still communicate on the telephone. And a lot of people don't realize that the reverse is available here in Iowa. And a lot of people who need this service are isolated and are not on the telephone talking to their loved ones. So it's in part of the outreach that I do, I want to try to find people who can still utilize that service. Also for people who have difficulty speaking, we have speech-to-speech relay. That's a relay that does not require any specialized equipment. People can call 711 or an 800 number through their cell phone, their work phone, any telephone, and use the service, which allows a relay operator to assist with the call as needed. It's a more unique service for people who have difficulty speaking. They do need to be able to speak, but if it's not very understandable to some people, our operators can help out by revoicing for the person who's using the service, or sometimes just helping as needed. So again, those are two services that are not well known, but very available here in the state of Iowa. Another service is called the captioned telephone. This is geared more toward our hard of hearing individuals, but also for people who are deaf and who speak. And it's another type of relay service that captions what's being said to them while they're on the phone. And the service is different because the operator is repeating into voice recognition technology what's being said, so that it's a little faster and it just scrolls on the screen for the individual to read as they're communicating on the telephone. So I just kind of wanted to go through the different services we have, for those of you who may be familiar with some but not others, and I appreciate you learning a little bit about that. And also just to be aware that in the state of Iowa, part of the Relay Iowa program is to work to do outreach, to reach out throughout the whole state and find people who need services, but also work with the hearing, because I don't know how many of you are familiar with getting hung up on when you're trying to make a relay call, whether it's video relay or internet relay or Relay Iowa. One of our programs is to educate the businesses throughout the state and encourage them to go through training, to learn more about deaf culture, to learn more about relay services, so that when they receive calls, they know what it is, so that they are less likely to hang up. I also work very closely with Stephanie Lyons from the Office of Deaf Services to help train 911 dispatchers statewide. At the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, Nancy Brady is the Director of Telecommunications, and she's made a point in all her training classes, her basic 911 training classes, to include an entire 2-hour session just for relay services. And we've made that 2-hour session 1 hour of relay services. In the second hour, we have that all about deaf culture. So Stephanie and I work as a team to train the dispatchers. And it really is eye-opening. We will ask a new class, how many of you know what 711 is? How many of you know what relay is? And a lot of people don't know. And they, by law, should know how to handle a relay call when they're receiving them. So giving them that reminder and going through that with them over and over is a great opportunity that we're able to do through the outreach program as well. And I think that's kind of an overview that I wanted to give, but I thank you again for your attention today and look forward to the next portion of the program.
Thank you very much. Before I introduce our next speaker, I did want to recognize that we have interpreters this afternoon. We have Renee Johnson, who is from Deaf Services Unlimited here in Des Moines. and she's doing the sign language, and we have Dawn Taylor, who's doing the real-time captioning. We're very fortunate to have them here today doing such a great job. Terry Truitt. I'm getting confused. That's not what I said, Carrie Truitt? Isn't that what I said, Carrie Truitt? No, what I said? Okay, anyway, thank you, Carrie. Appreciate you being here. It is unfortunate that Stephanie is not here today, Stephanie Lyons, but we have a person who would never be mistaken for Stephanie Lyons, who's going to read a piece of information she wants to share with you about her job and her life as a service provider for deaf people. Would you please give a warm welcome to somebody who's not Stephanie Lyons, Bob Jefferson?
Thank you. I am not Stephanie Lyons, but I do have her words before me. Welcome to International Disability Awareness. First, I want to thank Frank Strong, the Central Iowa Center for Independent Living, for working so hard to make the International Disability Awareness Plan. Good job, Frank. Why is International Disability Awareness Month so important? Because educating businesses, state government, hospitals, and police for our right of equal access, like the hearing do, we will break the barrier between the deaf-blind, and other disabilities. Our goal is to decrease laws that prohibit discrimination with doctors, police, and businesses in general. For example, several clients have contacted me about their concerns with effective communication and interpreting services not providing an interpreter when they went to an emergency room or a general business office. I was told to provide educational information to business. I am responsible for promoting the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, within this community. One of my duties is to assist groups and organizations in developing policies for communication access. It is not appropriate to use a deaf person's family or friends or employees as an interpreter. For you in the audience, if it was you interpreting for your daughter or son, wouldn't you feel highly stressed? Family members and friends cannot be expected to remain neutral and sign everything that they hear. They may be emotionally or personally involved with you, and this may affect their interpreting. Using them as interpreter can also cause problems in maintaining their confidentiality. We do appreciate the physician's efforts of writing back and forth. It is important to check with the patient to find out what their comfort level might be in this form of communication. A liability situation could happen if a patient is getting bits and pieces of information and misses out the most important information resulting in his or her health care. According to the ADA, deaf and hard of hearing people have the right to have accessibility with the result of effective communications. If a deaf person got pulled over by the police, how could the police communicate with them? Writing a note is the key, right? Well, if the person has an open warrant, they would go to jail. How do the police communicate properly to accommodate the deaf person? The proper communication key is the interpreter. When the deaf and hard of hearing ask for an interpreter or another form of communication, the police tend to tell the deaf people that they could write notes between the police and the deaf party. Again, remember, it is their right to be provided proper communicative devices. I'm so happy that we have International Disability Awareness Month to educate everyone on our rights. Thank you so very much.
All right. Well, this is the moment we've been waiting for. I've got to tell you, this is terrific for me. Dr. Hurwitz and I have something in common. That is, we both went to school in Council Bluffs. As you know, Council Bluffs is the location of the Iowa School for the Deaf and has been for a long time, and that's my hometown. So one of my first exposure to people with disabilities was some young boys on the city bus that I rode back then and still do. Using sign language, the first time I'd ever seen it, and they were from the School for the Deaf. In fact, it may have been Dr. Hurwitz himself, I don't know. But in any event, it's great that Dr. Hurwitz is, among all of his many accomplishments, is probably most importantly to me is he's a fellow Iowan. So he is from Sioux City, and I think he is about ready to make a presentation. Would you please give a warm welcome to Dr. Excuse me, Alan Hurwitz. Thank you. Dr. Hurwitz?
Well, hello everyone. It's good to be back home here in Iowa. Iowa is always in my heart. Like Frank said, I was born in Sioux City, born and raised. I went to school there. My parents, who are both deaf, my father was the one that went to the Iowa School for the Deaf and graduated there, I believe, in 1938. And Iowa will always be home to me. In 1981, when we had the Iowa Association for the Deaf conference here in Des Moines, I remember going to that. And it was celebrating the 100-year anniversary of services. I was the keynote speaker that evening, and I remember saying how proud I was of Iowa. One man stood up and said, "Now wait a minute, if you're so proud of Iowa, why did you move away?" Oh, I said, "Now wait a minute, I moved away so I could promote how wonderful Iowa was." And that's what I've been doing all of these years. A little bit of history about my family. My father was born deaf in Sioux City. His parents were from Russia, and they could not speak any English when they came here. So when my father was born, they didn't know what to do with him. My grandfather had a grocery store, so they kept him kind of behind the store until he was 13. And then they found out about the Iowa School for the Deaf in Council Bluffs. So that's where they put him, and that was his first formal education at 13. And he stayed there until he graduated at the age of 25. He did apply to go to Gallaudet University, was accepted, and then he dropped it because he fell in love with my mother. My mother is from Kansas City, and so they got married, and they worked for 1 year in Kansas, and then they moved to Sioux City and had been there ever since. So that's the story of my father. My mother, on the other hand, went to a different school. She was in St. Louis. So both of my parents did decide to send me to St. Louis for my formal education. I was 4. Can you imagine parents sending me, a child away 500 miles from home to St. Louis? That really can hit a child very hard, especially at 4 years old. But you know what? It was almost like I had 10 brothers at the School for the Deaf there, the boys that were in the dorm with me. So after I graduated, I went back to Sioux City. I went to their high school. It was called Central High School in Sioux City. It's not even there anymore. I believe it's been divided into 3 different high schools in Sioux City. But that is where I went to graduate.
And then I went to a small college, Sioux City, Morningside College. It was a very small school, a liberal arts school. Went there for 2 years, and that was during the Dark Ages, because we had never heard of interpreters back then. So we struggled, we beat ourselves up, we didn't understand what the professor was saying. Luckily, I had good study habits, so I just stuck to reading the books, going to the library, and studying on my own. So I went to Morningside for 2 years. Then I went to Washington University in St. Louis because I wanted to be closer to my girlfriend. That was the only reason I even went there. Graduated there with a degree in electrical engineering. And I got a job as an electrical engineer for an aircraft company called McDonnell. Not McDonald's, McDonnell. So I got a job there and worked there for 5 years. It was a wonderful job. It was a wonderful experience for me. And then at Rochester, they set up this new Institute of Technology for the Deaf. I believe that was in 1968 for students who wanted to study more in the technology field, engineering, science, and etc. Now, Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. was a liberal arts university, so there was 2 different universities. So I transferred to then Rochester, and I stayed there for almost 40 years. I had different jobs. I did become president of the National Technical Institute for the Deaf for the last 6 years that I was there. While I was working at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf in Rochester, New York, I went to the University of Rochester for my doctorate. That was my first time that I had ever had an interpreter in my life. I remember going to one of the classes and they stuck an interpreter in front of me. And I just felt like, wow, all of those years of missing so much information in the classroom, not knowing what the professor was saying, not knowing what exactly I was supposed to do. And that was a struggle for so many years. And now, for my doctorate level program, I had an interpreter in front of me. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I had goosebumps. It was the first time I understood what the professor was saying. That was probably the most powerful point of my life. But again, that being the first time, I did not know how to use an interpreter. For this kind of program, they often required group discussion, going back and forth, and it was very difficult for the interpreter to follow what was being said. And I couldn't really participate fully. I couldn't jump in if I had a question or a comment or wanted to argue a point. It was very difficult to get in. So the interpreter and I, the professor, met and talked about the role of the interpreter, the role of the professor, and the role of the student. So it was decided that they would set up a procedure that one person would speak at a time, and that's it. If another person wanted to speak, they had to raise their hand and wait until they were recognized and hold on until the interpreter was done voicing or signing, whichever. And then it was more of a turn taking. And that's the point when I started to be able to participate in group discussions. I would raise my hand and the professor would look at me and point at me if I had a question or a comment, or if we were having a discussion. So that was my learning experience. it was a transformation from being this quiet student, a very passive student, to becoming a very active student and being involved in the classroom. That also applied to my job, because I began to assume more and more responsibilities in my job. I became department chair, I became dean of the college, and then I became vice president, and then becoming president. Which means that I was in many, many meetings with my colleagues, and many of my colleagues were not deaf. So how was I able to participate? How was I able to lead a group discussion? So that experience at the Rochester University with that interpreter taught me how to use an interpreter effectively. So I could become more active and participate and lead group discussions. So that was my experience with an interpreter. Oh, while I was growing up in Sioux City, when I was, I believe, 13, I had my first job delivering newspapers every morning. I would have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, walk about 2 miles, pick up the stack of newspapers, and then deliver them in the neighborhood. And then I was back home by 6 o'clock in the morning. I had to then take a shower, eat breakfast, and then go to school. And I did that for 4.5 years. And that was a wonderful job, because I had to collect money. I had to go to the homes. I don't think they do that anymore, but back in the day, every Thursday and Friday, I would have to go to my customers' homes, knock on the door, and collect the money. I believe it was maybe 50 cents a week or something. Sometimes the owner of the house would say, "Oh, come on in," and they would give me milk or cookies, or we would talk. And every Saturday, I would go to the Sioux City Journal, the newspaper company, to pay my bills, and whatever was left, which I believe was maybe $12 a week, was my profit. And I would save that money, and I bought my first car when I was 16 years old with that money. So that taught me a very valuable lesson in how to earn money, work, pay bills, and purchase something. In high school, I worked for a restaurant as a busboy or a cook, or I would have to clean, mop the floors. And also for 3 summers, I worked with my father, who was an upholsterer. He would upholster furniture. So I worked with him for 3 years, or 3 summers. And that was a wonderful experience. I also worked as a cabinet maker with another deaf man who worked for this particular company. So I worked with him for, I believe it was just 1 summer. And that was when I learned probably one of my biggest lessons. See, I thought that I was good with woodworking. My responsibility was to sand some beautiful piece of wood furniture, and I thought I did an excellent job. It was smooth, and I would ask my supervisor to come over and feel it, if it's smooth, if it's to his satisfaction, and he would say, "Nope, it's not good enough. Try it again. Try it again. Try it again." I felt like I couldn't do the job. After about 3 weeks, I got a pink slip. In other words, I was fired. That was my first experience of even being fired. So I learned a lot about what I myself was good at, what I was skilled at, and what I was not skilled at. Things that I really enjoyed doing, or things that I did not like to do. So that was the beginning of my work experience. I even worked at a turkey farm. I would have to chase after the turkeys and catch them, and they would give them like a vaccine. That was a wonderful experience, very fun. So I had a lot of different jobs, a lot of different work experience. I washed cars as well. So all of these different jobs helped me prepare for my life, for my career. There are 3 beliefs that I've always carried with me throughout my life. I believed that education would take me places. Education, education, education. Education is never a waste of time. You want to succeed in the future? Education. The second thing that I believed was that I believed that me being deaf, I did have obstacles, but these were obstacles that I could overcome. Just like what you were talking about with interpreters or Iowa Relay. Those are different ways to take down the barriers. So that was my second belief, was to never allow the barriers to stop you from doing what you want to do. And thirdly, I've always believed that hard work pays off. Those are the 3 beliefs that I have carried with me throughout my whole life. Education, breaking down barriers, and hard work. Never be afraid of hard work. Nothing's hard. It might look hard, but once you do it, it should be fine. When I went to high school, it was a struggle for me. Again, there was no interpreter, there was no note taker, there was no support services. But at the same time, these struggles taught me the value of education and access to the information that education provides. Today we have outstanding interpreters and outstanding schools. I am concerned about the Iowa School for the Deaf. That's where many young people got their wonderful education, and I do hope that it will succeed to make sure that deaf children have the options and the choices, because it's very critical. When I went to a hearing high school, I was very lonely. I was the only deaf student. Luckily, my parents were deaf, so their friends were then, in turn, my friends. I had maybe 1 or 2 friends, but communication with them was very, very basic. It was, hi, how are you? Nice day, it's cold outside. Any kind of deep communication that typical high schoolers would experience, I did not get that. It can happen at the Iowa School for the Deaf. It happens at Gallaudet University. We have almost 2,000 students from all over the United States at Gallaudet. I know many people assume Gallaudet University is only for deaf students, but that's not true. About 1/3 of our students are hearing. They're studying to become interpreters, audiologists, social workers, counselors, a variety of careers. So we do have a good mix of students at Gallaudet University. Also, when I was growing up, again, no interpreter. So sometimes my parents, if there was an emergency, if I had to see the doctor at 2 o'clock in the morning, what would we do? We would walk next door. There was an old lady who lived next to us named Mrs. Hook. I don't think I ever knew her first name, but I would ring her doorbell at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "We need you to call the doctor." So she would invite us in, and we would write back and forth and explain to her what we need, and she would read the note, and she would call and explain it and write it back and forth with us. And that was my first experience with, I guess you could call her an informal interpreting process. Over time, many children of deaf parents filled that interpreting gap. Many of them maybe were very enthusiastic. They wanted to. A lot of children didn't want to interpret for their parents. Over time, there was more volunteer interpreters at churches, at clubs. Really, in 1965 is when we started to see more schools, more professional interpreters. At the time, there was no professional standards for interpreters, so they set up the National Registry for the Deaf to set up high standards to provide quality interpreting services. So we set up training, classes, and now, of course, we have more qualified interpreters than we did before. There's also video relay services that also require highly skilled, highly qualified interpreters. When you think about what makes a good program, what makes a good school, for example, Gallaudet University, it's a family, it's a culture, and it's a dream for many young people to become successful. When they graduate from Gallaudet University, they go on to become business people, to become lawyers, doctors, scientists, artists, I mean, you name it. They can become that. I really believe that technology has really changed the way we think. In the past, we thought, oh, we can't do it, we can't do it. But now we have iPhones, Blackberries. We can pretty much communicate with anybody. Deaf to deaf can sign face-to-face through FaceTime on the iPad. I can call Frank, I can call Bob, I can call anyone through a relay service. So technology has really boomed for deaf people and the community. Gallaudet University has been known for advancing education and advising how the rest of the world sees deaf people. We do have a worldwide reputation. We have a wonderful academic program. We provide BA degrees, MA degrees, PhDs. We have a PhD programs in different fields, education, psychology, education, sociology, a lot of different career areas. Now we have an MPA, which is a Master's of Public Administration for hearing people who want to go into, or for people who want to go into government jobs, creating policies for the future. Also, Gallaudet University has set up a 10-year master's plan to make the campus more accessible for people. We've already submitted this to the D.C. board for their review and approval. There's a lot of changes but we're focusing on something called deaf space concept, making the building more accessible with people with disabilities, people maybe who are deaf, deaf-blind, or other disabilities. For example, traditionally our hallways are very narrow. Now, if two deaf people are walking together, they can't talk with each other side by side in this very cramped hallway. So widening the hallway so communication can be improved. But that would also make it more accessible for people who use wheelchairs, people who have vision limitations. Like when I came into the room, I was sitting in front of this window here with this bright light, and I couldn't see it, or I couldn't see very well, so closing the curtains is another example of deaf space for a building. And that's coming up in the future. Gallaudet University was set up in 1864. Who signed the college into law? Abraham Lincoln. We were lucky to have that signed in 1864 before he passed away, which was 1 year later. The dream was to set up a college for deaf students. Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, believed that deaf people deserved a fair chance in the race of life. And everyone, and I quote that, a fair chance in the race of life. He believed that everyone should have equal opportunity, which is what we're doing here today. The exact same thing that we're talking about. A fair chance for people with disabilities in the race of life. That was set up here by President Abraham Lincoln in 1864, is what he said. The positive steps that we have taken for equal rights for deaf people can be marked along the course. There is still more work to be done. I know we've had many positive things come about, but we're not done. There's always something left to do, especially with attitudes and viewpoints of people who don't understand people with disabilities or don't understand deaf people or their culture. So there is a lot more education of the public that needs to be done in regards to deaf people or people with disabilities that can succeed. I believe we're getting closer. It's almost like a moving target. Every time we make a step forward, the target seems to get a little bit further away, but we're getting there. So, thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts with you this afternoon. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Hurwitz. Really appreciate your remarks this afternoon. We have a couple of things we want to make. I do want to tell you a little bit about our Center for Independent Living. We're a nonprofit corporation, and we help people with disabilities live independently in the community, and that means that we don't have apartment complexes and we don't have institutions where people live. We help people find places to live in the community where they want to live, not where we want them to live. And this concept started about 30 years ago, and it's a fantastic concept, and it gives us the opportunity to work with people who are deaf, people who are blind, people who use wheelchairs, people who have emotional disabilities. And we work with all ages because people with disabilities are discriminated against regularly in our society, in fact, throughout the whole world. And that's the reason why we have this event every year because we know there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of misconceptions about people with disabilities, and there's a lot of people with disabilities who just want, as Dr. Hurwitz says, a fair deal. And that's what we do, is we help people help themselves. We don't have a master's program like Dr. Hurwitz has, but we do have programs that help people help themselves. We're consumer controlled, and the majority of our staff are people with disabilities, and we don't hire anybody because of a disability. We hire people because they can get the job done. So I know Bob's got a couple of comments he wants to share with you this afternoon. Mr. Jepson?
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Hurwitz. We have a small token of appreciation that I would just like to pass on to you. I would also like to just thank some of our partners that helped us put this together. One of the beautiful things about our organization is that we are run by people with disabilities, and our entire focus is on disabilities from the disability community. We have a board member here today, Mike Davis. I would like to thank Mike for showing up. I would also like to thank Senator Beal for getting us this room. It's a fantastic room, and you know, the opportunity of having it is just great. I did receive letters from both Senator Harkin and Senator Grassley expressing their apologies that they were neither one able to be here because of prior commitments. So wanted to state that. I would like to thank a corporate partner, the Marriott Corporation, and the general manager here in Des Moines, Terry McLean. They were gracious enough in providing the room for Dr. Hurwitz last night, and I hope it was nice. We would like to thank Gallaudet University. Gallaudet University has provided transportation and a lot of the things that brought Dr. Hurwitz here, and we are very grateful for that. We would like to thank the Iowa Department of Human Rights, the Office of Persons with Disabilities, and the Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. Thank you both for being here. Relay, we would like to thank you folks for being here. The PA system was provided by the Southside Music Studio, and that was a donation for us. I would like to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we have going on at the center that we're kind of excited about and should be some fun. And if you would like to come down, we would more than welcome you. We have a fall frolic and open house on Friday, October 26th at the center from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock. So come down, enjoy some food, bring some food if you wish to bring it and share it. We're just going to have a fun time. Frank tends to play guitar a little bit, and we get to singing and just having a fun time together. So that's going to be happening. On October 31st from 10 o'clock until noon, we're going to have a demonstration of a standing wheelchair. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a standing wheelchair, but they're fantastic. They allow an individual that is in a wheelchair to stand up, reach things in a cupboard in a kitchen, for instance, or exactly various things like that. So great product. October 31st, Halloween, at 10 o'clock until noon. Also, we do have at the center a free public access video telephone. So if you're interested in that, please come down, take a look at it. We had some people come down before and said, wow, I've never seen one of these. They were going to use it, but they forgot the phone number of the person they were going to call. So they are going to be back again. So, but that is there. Also, on January 15th, next year, 2013, which isn't that far away now, at 7 o'clock until 9 o'clock in this very building, on the lower floor, we will have a legislative breakfast. You get a chance to talk to your legislators and thank some of them for some of the things that they have done, and tell others some of the things that they should do, and just get to talk to them. And with that, I think that we're going to close this meeting and get you out of here on time. It runs from 1 o'clock until 2 o'clock. And I would like to thank Frank Strong very much for all the work that he's put together in this. Dr. Hurwitz, thank you very much for your participation. My other speakers, thank you very much. Folks, have a great weekend and enjoy.
Be sure and stop by and say hi to Dr. Hurwitz while he's here in town, folks. Thanks, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.
You join us.
I hear 101. I got locked out. I went to that door to leave. You can't get in this way. So I go through. I went to the side door. I hear 101. Don't get caught, yes.